now discuss a brief history of remote sensing. The history of remote sensing and aerial photography starts with the invention of the camera in the 1800s. In 1825, Joseph Niepce took the first permanent photograph, which had spurred huge improvements in photography. People had quickly become interested in taking aerial photographs, the earliest of which was taken from balloons. In 1858, Gaspard Felix Turconin, more commonly known today by his pseudonym Nadar, captured the first aerial photograph in the French village of Petit Pecheur by using a tethered hot air balloon. Unfortunately, the image did not survive, but Nadar's first aerial image that did survive was taken in Paris in 1866. 1 year later, he contacted the French military about taking military photos to make maps for the French army's campaign in Italy. Aerial photography was even used during the US Civil War. In the late 1800s, Arthur Butut took the first aerial photographs by using a kite. Pigeons were also used to collect remotely sensed imagery. In order for the pigeons to carry such a small camera and take several pictures in one flight, a new type of film and a smaller camera system were needed. In the 1870s, George Eastman of Kodak created the lightweight film camera mentioned earlier to use for pigeons to take aerial photographs. The Wright brothers successfully flew the first airplane in 1903, and then in 1909, Wilbur Wright took the first aerial photograph from an airplane. During World Wars I and II, cameras were often mounted on airplanes to get aerial land views of invaluable military reconnaissance imagery. In World War II, the Allied forces enlisted a team of experts to review millions of stereoscopic aerial images to find hidden Nazi rocket bases. Stereoscopic imagery analysis is when you look at two photos of the same location, but those that are taken at slightly different angles to create an illusion of depth. I had to learn how to do that in my first remote sensing class, and it's harder than it seems. The professor I took the class from was pretty old school, and he had studied under the most well-known remote sensing academic of the time, which was really at the beginning of the field, and he bragged about it a lot. Anytime a student would complain, he would talk about how he used to have to print the map images on hundreds of sheets of paper and then take them to the wall and analyze them that way. Anyways, cameras were also being attached to rockets and large caliber artillery guns during multiple wars throughout the world, not just World Wars I and II. Aerial photography exploded following both world wars and was used in a variety of ways. The photos allowed people to see the world in a new and realistic way. It was much faster and cheaper to produce maps, especially when compared to traditional ground surveys. In the 1930s in the US, the Agricultural Adjustment Act was passed as a result of the Dust Bowl. The Agricultural Adjustment Administration used aerial photography from 1937 to 1941, collecting imagery of over 90% of the agricultural land in the United States. That program became a tool for land conservation and planning and helped to make fair and accurate measurements. The program has since become part of the Farm Service Agency, or FSA, which is still responsible for aerial imagery programs in the US. Color infrared images became important in identifying different vegetation types and detecting diseased and damaged vegetation. Multispectral imagery, that is, images taken at the same time, but within different portions of the electromagnetic spectrum, which we'll talk about shortly, was being tested for different applications. After World War II, the Cold War began the space race between the US and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union launched the world's first satellite, Sputnik 1, in 1957. Challenge accepted. The US launched the Explorer 1 in 1960. This started huge advances in satellite and imaging technology, and it spurred the launching of many more satellites. There are over 3,600 satellites currently orbiting the Earth, but only about 1,400 are actually operational. The Cold War created a need for the US to know about the military strength of the Soviet Union. Reconnaissance planes could only fly around the edges of the country, while the bulk of the information was in the middle, and the planes were also often shot down. So the US wanted to create a new plane that could fly high enough to avoid being shot down, while also having the ability to take high-resolution images. This is when the U-2 aircraft, flying at 70,000 feet, sparked an increased amount of remote imagery reconnaissance. However, it quickly became apparent that the Soviet Union would try to find a way to shoot down the U-2 planes, which sparked the Corona program, ironically enough. Corona was funded by the CIA and US Air Force to create reconnaissance orbiting satellites, and the first was launched in 1959. As I'm sure you can guess, once the US started launching monitoring satellites for the Soviet Union, then the Soviet Union also started launching their own recon satellites in 1961, and the first was called the Zenit 2 program. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a 13-day confrontation between the US and the Soviet Union in 1962 as a result of Soviet ballistic missiles being deployed in Cuba. It's often considered the closest the Cold War has ever become to becoming a full-blown nuclear war. Fidel Castro and Nikita Khrushchev had met in a secret meeting and agreed to place a number of missiles on the island to deter future invasions and bombings as a result of the failed Bay of Pigs invasion and the US ballistic missiles that were located outside of the US. The missiles were confirmed when a U-2 plane found clear photographic evidence of both medium and intermediate range ballistic missile facilities. President John F. Kennedy responded by ordering a naval blockade to stop more missiles from getting into Cuba, and the U.S. announced that it would not allow the weapon into Cuba and demanded that the missiles be returned to the Soviet Union. After heated negotiations, the Soviets agreed to dismantle their missiles in Cuba and bring them back to the Soviet Union, and the U.S. unofficially agreed to dismantle all U.S.-built ballistic missiles in Turkey, which were originally created to defend against the Soviet Union. Since the 1960s, there have been some monumental changes in remote sensing. The term remote sensing was coined by Evelyn L. Pruitt of the U.S. Office of Naval Research in 1960 as a more comprehensive term than aerial imagery, which included new methods and technologies. Between the 60s and 70s, satellites became the primary remotely sensed imagery platform because they can cover a wider spatial range and monitor data more regularly. Imagery also made a jump from analog to digital to keep up with computer technology. Additionally, a multispectral sensor became available to record data from several different portions of the electromagnetic spectrum simultaneously. Lastly, social movements of the 60s and 70s instigated concern about changes in the Earth's physical environment, which was now easily monitored by remotely sensed imagery.